Jon Macaskill is a Navy SEAL. He's also into meditation and mindfulness. And that's all you need to hear from me, because it's time to hear from him. You're listening to Zack Miller Says. All right, Jon, I think in the last 5 years or so, the word meditation has become a lot more, socially acceptable, right? And people seem to be using it to start their mornings, or to not just have Zen-like moments, but incorporate it into their kind of day-to-day. Is like, how did you start getting into meditation? What was your first introduction to it?
Yeah, so as far as it gaining acceptance in culture these days, I was one of those people that kind of had a stereotype in my mind of what people who meditate, what they are. And that stereotype was wrong. It was, hippies or monks, which, hey, I don't have anything against them. It's just not who I am. And I actually, in the Navy, I had struggled with some depression and anxiety, and ended up getting introduced to a psychologist that sat me down. And he's like, hey, we're going to try something new. It's probably going to make you uncomfortable. I'm going to recommend mindfulness and meditation to you. And first off, I didn't know what mindfulness was. And then meditation, being that I consider myself, or at least did consider myself, a tough guy, I thought, okay, well, meditation's not for me. This isn't going to work. Let's try something else. And he convinced me, hey, look, here's the science and benefits behind meditation. Here's why it works scientifically, right? And here's some very high performers who practice it, trying to help me break the stereotype or that stigma that I had in my mind about what meditation is, who practices it. So I practiced it for a couple of weeks, just off some guided meditations on some apps, and then went from there back to his office. I'm like, hey man, this isn't working for me. What else you got? And he's like, well, 2 weeks, that's like going to the gym for 2 weeks and expecting you're going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or The Rock behind you there. So yeah, I took a little dose of humility, went back, was practicing for about 2 months, and really started to see a difference in how I was handling stress. The highs and lows kind of disappeared, and I really started to feel a lot better about how I was in my day. So the meditation consisted of, setting aside a very intentional block of time in the day and doing, 10 or 15 minutes. It started like 1 or 2 minutes. My mind would race, and then I would think, okay, well, I can't meditate. But that's just part of what meditation is noticing that your mind is bouncing around and then coming back to that point of focus. And then the mindfulness side, again, what that doc had told me, hey, you need to practice mindfulness and meditation. I was like, okay, well, what is mindfulness? Well, mindfulness is focusing on the here and the now. And what I had learned to do through, again, those kind of guided meditations, and then through reading about it, and then through some practice with some friends, was just focusing on my breath, noticing it here and now, when I was at work, doing it, when I was eating, paying attention to the flavors of the food and not just scarfing food, and just being more present in the here and now. And that's what mindfulness is. And so, yes, to answer your question, sorry, that was probably a really long answer. It has gained more acceptance in culture, and I hope that it continues to, because the benefits are innumerable, and really it helps with work, it helps with family, it helps with who you are in society. So
when do you typically start a day? Do you start your days with this? Do you do it later in the day?
Yeah, I personally start my day with it. I have some meditation apps that I use. I personally use Insight Timer or eMindful, but there's hundreds of apps out there. 10% Happier. I could rattle off several, but bottom line is, I start with my phone. I charge my phone in the kitchen, because I feel that if I charge it by my bed, then it causes anxiety. And the first thing I do when I roll over the morning, I would roll over, grab it, and see what I missed on social media or email. And then before I know it, I've spent an hour and I'm down several rabbit holes and I haven't done my meditation. So I grab my phone that's charging in the kitchen, open up the first page, and that's where my meditation apps are. All the other stuff, social media, email, messaging, that's all several pages or several folders buried into my phone so that I don't get distracted by that. I don't have notifications turned on. So first thing I do, open up the meditation app and try to meditate for 10, 15, 20 minutes. So that's how I try to start my day. I'm not perfect by any means. There's days that I go without meditating, but the days that I do meditate, I do feel more focused and more productive through my day, and quite honestly, and more importantly, more calm and less anxious through my day.
It's very interesting. So I also do not sleep with my phone. And I don't know if it's for the same reason as you, of opening it up and seeing a billion different things. Up until a few weeks ago, I didn't have social media on my phone whatsoever. I went about 18 months without it. Nice. Just to see what would it be like. And so I would look at my screen time, and it would be not a lot of time. And then when I downloaded them back, it's hours of time on there. I'm like, oh Lord, this is ridiculous. Yeah. I also, I've been meditating. I had listened to Dan Harris, who is 10% Happier's book. I believe it was one of Rich Roll's podcast about 18 or so months ago. And that piqued my interest to then listen to his book. So I did that, and then I downloaded his app. I didn't like meditating the first few times I did it, kind of like you're saying. I downloaded a bunch of different people. Maybe it was their voices that I didn't like. But then in November of 18, I believe, I met one of the investors, Jason Calacanis, in Calm.com.
Calm, yeah.
And so I had Calm, and I had done it a handful of times. And then the Monday after I met him, and I met him on a Friday, I started, no joke, meditating 200 straight days.
Wow.
And so
good for you.
The best thing I think about any kind of meditation is a tracking device too, right?
Yeah.
Is so that you know that you've done it. You're habitual into it, right? So you know, I'm at day 5, I'm at day 7. So I did 200 straight days, and then I basically went 6 months without it.
Oh wow.
So not intentionally, I always enjoyed meditating, but I restarted a new habit.
Yeah.
And so about 60 or 70 days ago, I restarted again. I've been back on it. But it's interesting how those habits can go in and out so quickly, even though you did something for so long, which is interesting.
It's just like the gym, man. Like you go to the gym for 200 days straight, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to take 6 months off, or you're going to take some time off, and before you know it, you're 6 months.
I've worked out for over 2 years straight, basically. Right, nice. No days off. And I'm terrified that if I take one of those days off, it becomes 2, it becomes 10, it becomes I'm not into fitness anymore. And so I'm with you. Do you find that because when you wake up and it's one of the very first things that you do, right? Mine's one of the first 3 things that I do. So coffee, meditation, use the bathroom. It's usually one of those 3 things. And I don't drink the coffee, I make the coffee. Do you find that it's imperative to your day to be successful that you do that thing very first thing, and if you miss it and it's 9:00 at night, you don't have as successful of a day?
I have found, I wouldn't say that I don't have a successful day, but I have found that I feel more anxious throughout the day. I'm less focused most of the time. If I don't meditate, I can definitely look back at the day and be like, okay, well, what was different? Oh, well, I didn't meditate. And that's kind of what was kind of the driving factor behind my focus or my lower level of anxiety. Yeah, absolutely. Some people say, well, I don't have time to meditate. And it's been said that if you don't have time to meditate, then you need to meditate even more. If you don't have 10 minutes to meditate, then you need to meditate for an hour because the more you meditate, theoretically, the more focused and more productive you are, so you can actually do more in your day. Not that that's why I recommend meditating. I think the benefits health-wise, mentally, that's more important. The byproduct is that you can be more productive and more focused through your day, which, I mean, in turn, makes you less stressed, right? If you're actually able to get through your to-do list or get further through your to-do list than you typically are, then you're going to stress less. So kind of builds upon itself.
I find personally that the time excuse is just that, an excuse, right? I
Yep.
don't have time to meditate. I don't have time to work out.
Yeah.
Really, come on, guys. Like you said, 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And it's very easy to do. It's just being consistent. And so, do you think that we talked about kind of being socially acceptable? Do you think it was? You talked about hippies and monks and things like that. Like, is it because it was just like a wimpy thing to do? And then, like, what's been that curve to make it something that's been okay to be a part of?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. One is, yeah, that stereotype is totally wrong. I mean, if you really go back far into where meditation comes from, I mean, some of the finest warriors in our past did that, right? I mean, Spartans, the samurai, that there was meditation in their taking time to do some introspection before they would go onto the battlefield. So somewhere along the line, it got this negative connotation that only like wimps did it, right? Which is completely wrong. I think if anybody is in charge of their mind, in charge of their thoughts, it's the warriors. So it's truly, I think, starting to gain acceptance again in the warrior communities and outside of the hippies and monks, because of the realization that it has been done by warriors in other cultures outside. I think the Western culture of warrior is probably one of the problems for meditation, in that for some reason we think that it's weakness. We think that only people who meditate are those who are weak. People who meditate are those who have mental problems. Well, you can meditate just like going to the gym, right? Again, as I keep using this analogy, you don't go to the gym because you're weak. You go to the gym because you want to get strong. You want to maintain some level of fitness. Well, you meditate not because you're weak. You meditate because you want to have a strong mind and you want to maintain a level of mental health. So I think that's where that stereotype and that stigma has changed in recent years. I'm sure social media has had something to do with that. You know, you start to see more people claiming that they meditate, like the fact that you're doing a podcast on it and you said that you did 200 days, and meanwhile you have a picture of the rock behind you. That's a great like, hey, look, you're meditating and you're not weak, right? And even for those who are meditating, may have mental health challenges. I don't want to call them issues or problems, but challenges. That's not a weakness. I think that's strength to know that you have a challenge and take a proactive step towards healing via use of meditation or mindfulness.
It's almost like you said warriors. It's like to be a badass, you have to meditate, and it allows you to. It's crazy too, because like I always find that like people tell me, "Oh, you're not bad at meditating." I'm terrible at meditating because I'm always thinking, right? Which is not what you're supposed to be doing. However, at least I'm taking that 10 minutes to do that, and it's or however the length is, but it's just like it is very insightful to be just sitting somewhere and focus and trying to focus on this one thing, because it does make you stronger in the long run. So you are in the Navy.
Yes, I am.
You've been in the Navy for how long?
Almost 23 years.
Okay. When into being in the Navy did you start doing this, going to that doctor?
Not soon enough. I really wish that I'd found this guy, a decade beforehand. I only really, I got introduced to him about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And then started practicing regularly and fairly intensely about 2 years ago. Started sharing it with friends, family, probably a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And then was like, hey, you know what? What do I want to do when I get out of the Navy? Well, I started looking at all the different careers that are out there, and tons of great careers, tons of them, but nothing was jumping out at me. And then I realized that the answer was right there staring me in the face. As I was teaching friends and family about meditation, I realized that that could be a job that I could do.
Were you
So,
excited about telling your friends and family and anyone that would listen because it was something that was working for you and you were just excited to do it, or was it something else?
well, initially I wasn't super excited to tell people because that same kind of that stigma or that stereotype that I had. I thought that if I told people that I was meditating, that I was going to be admitting weakness. And then I did tell a couple of friends, and I was surprised by how open they were to it. And they accepted it, and they started asking me questions about it. And then I found that as I told more and more people about it, they were more and more accepting. So it was kind of counterintuitive. And then I started getting excited about it. Once I had seen that people were more open to it than I had initially thought, then I did start getting excited about it and start sharing it with just about everybody. And then I was like, you know what, this is a part of who I am. This is part of my the proverbial "what's your brand?" Well, mindfulness and meditation has become a part of my brand.
So there is, I guess, two sides to the equation of those in the military. Those that never come out and say anything, and then there's this side where people are actively talking, right? And so I can think of a couple of people that are out now of the military and have created, like you just said, brands that they learned about while being in the Navy. So I'm thinking of Jocko, and then I'm thinking of someone like a David Goggins. And so it seems like when I talk to those that have been in the Navy, they either love those people for talking about it or they hate them for talking about things, whether or not they are talking about military things or not. Like, why is that stigma there?
Sure. Well, I mean, the two guys you mentioned are SEALs, and in the SEAL community, we talk about the fact that we do not advertise the nature of our work. But then, as soon as people get out, you see us writing books and there's movies. So it's almost like we're going against our own creed by getting out and writing books and writing and being parts of movies. That said, being a SEAL is part of who we are. It's just like, if you'd gone to school to become a doctor, you have a PhD, well, that's a part of our story, a part of who we are. It's not all of who we are, but it's a part of who we are. And I feel that if we're using that to benefit society, then it's good. If we're using it to benefit ourselves solely, so we're going out and we're saying, look at us, we're big bad Navy SEALs, buy us a beer or give us $1 million to be in your movie, then I am completely against it. But I think if it's for the betterment of humanity, betterment of society, or betterment of our friends and family, then I'm all for it, as long as we do it in a professional manner. And we're not specifically, I'm not on here talking about missions and operations that I went on. I'm not gonna do that. That's just not who I am. Even Jocko, I mean, he talks about missions. Jocko and Leif in their books, they talk about missions that they went on, but they use it to talk about leadership and improve those around them, improve leaders in corporate America. And I think that's good. But if they're using it just to promote themselves, then I think that's where people cross the line and get themselves in trouble.
So they're capitalizing, and I think I'm going to paraphrase and correct
Sure.
me where I'm wrong. So they're capitalizing on that term, Navy SEAL, that people want to gravitate towards, and then they're telling their side of that story by using it, but not necessarily talking about the missions, and then it becomes cool in your book type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the way I've kind of phrased it in the past is, hey, it's a part of the business card and may get your foot in the door. But if that's all you're relying on, if that's all the depth that you have to you is that you are a Navy SEAL and that's all you can talk, then hey, I think you're selling a false bill of goods. If you're using it to get in the door, proverbially, you get in the door, but then you can talk a lot more. You can talk about leadership. You can talk about being a manager. You can talk about, here I am talking about mindfulness and how applicable it is to being a warrior. but I don't go into the detail about what happened on the battlefield, then I think there's more depth there. If there's more depth there, then I think that's where you're okay in my book.
Gotcha. I believe it was your LinkedIn page where you posted about Goggins' book, and it got thousands of comments or something like that. You've read his book?
I have. Well, I take that back. That was a book that I didn't read, and I listened to the audiobook, and it was a super unique audiobook. I don't know if you've listened to it.
I listened to it as well. So because
so it's like a podcast, right? So they read a chapter, and then in between chapters, David and forgetting the author's name right now, they speak about that chapter, they speak about what David did, or they speak about stuff that's not necessarily covered in the book. And I love that format. And the reason I posted about it is because David got a bad rap in the teams at one point. And even, I'll admit, I was naive, and I kind of went with some of people's opinions. I was like, oh, yeah, David came in and he was an ultra marathoner, and that's what he did in the teams. Well, I read the book, and his freaking background is incredible. And then what he's done since he left the teams and what he did while he was in the teams, he was a badass. And he did some great work, both in and outside, and he's continuing to do great work because I think he's a firefighter now. I think he's great. He's a powerhouse, man.
Anyone that's competing against Michelle Obama, 1 and 2 on their books on Amazon for basically the majority of 2019. It's an impressive story, and he uses that kind of business card, like you're saying, to get in the door.
Yeah.
But he really never even talks about that stuff afterwards. I mean, he talks about getting in, he talks about the bad stuff of failing multiple times and stuff like that. But then, I love the 40% rule of what he's saying, where you think, as I'm sitting here thinking in 45 minutes, I have to go on a run, by the way. And I'm thinking, like, I'm going to hit that 40% and be like, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? Yeah. But it's like the concept is that when you think you want to quit, when you think you're done, you've only gone 40% of the way.
Right.
Right. Which is interesting. Is there anything from that book or from Jocko and Leif's book that you can think of that really resonates with you, that's really hit home, that you've incorporated in your life since?
Yeah, I've read both of Jocko and Leif's books, but I think really what jumped out at me in David's book, I can't remember if it's in the book or just the audio, but he talks about callousing your mind. And, going through miserable things. He talks about, when his foot was so swollen and he freaking duct taped it in Hell Week, duct taped it underneath his boot so that it wouldn't swell anymore, and he could actually run on the stress factors that he had going on. And he talks about how when your alarm clock goes off in the morning, how, jumping out of bed and doing a miserable run in the cold or the rain, how that calluses your mind to really help to develop a sense of resilience and commitment, not just to yourself, but to others around you. I think that was when my alarm goes off in the morning, if I have a workout planned, I try to imagine David Goggins in the morning when that thing goes off. I'm like, okay, John, it's time to callous your mind, right? Time to get up. So those are the ones that stick out to me. I'm trying to think what, Jocko and Leif, they're superhuman as well. And I'm trying to think if anything jumps out at me right off the bat, but I can't think of anything. You put me on the spot, man. So
that's what I like to do. And I believe it's the in Jocko and Leif's book. I can't recall which one it was, but there's a scene where one of them is working with someone new. And they're talking about how the new person wants them to canvas miles of length, basically. And Jocko or Leif is like, no, we need to be doing like a quarter of a mile, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a real story or not, but like something bad happens, and because everyone's within a quarter mile instead of 10 miles, they're able to fix the problem very quickly. And I thought that was really interesting, how so many people want to be so big so quickly, or just canvas this entirely large place, when instead it's like, do what's in your room, right? Do what's in the room that you're in, win that, and then maybe you expand off of that. I always thought was a really interesting kind of mindset.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I think that's the part in the book when they almost have a blue on blue where, when we almost killed our own guys. I think that's right, if I'm remembering the books right, and that's in Extreme Leadership.
It's that book. It's that book.
Yeah. I fully agree. I mean, we quite often bite off more than we can chew, and that's in the military sense, and that's just in humanity. And I found myself, as I'm starting to try to be an entrepreneur, I'm trying to implement some of the lessons from your book, and I find that I quite often bite off more than I can chew in that. And it's a grind, right? By being an entrepreneur. So I'm working in a nonprofit, but I've also got my own side gig teaching leadership, or sorry, not leadership, but mindfulness, and to corporate teams. And I'm very much enjoying that, but it does spread you pretty thin. So you have to realize how much you can take on, because once you start taking on more, you end up sacrificing like that 10 or 15 minutes to meditate. And now you're not taking care of yourself. If you're not taking care of yourself, then you can't take care of those around you. So those that you really care for. So absolutely, agree with that.
Callousing your mind to the no's that you need to tell those people, even though you want to help them. So how
Right.
That concept with callousing your mind to mindfulness and meditation, how do you incorporate those two together?
Yeah, it's a good question, because the other day I posted something on LinkedIn about, hey, getting wet when your alarm clock goes off, getting up. And somebody was like, well, sometimes you need to be gentle with yourself. And I had to agree with them. Yeah, there's a little bit of callousing your mind, and then there's also having to take care of yourself. And if your alarm goes off and you really feel like today is not the day that you're getting up at 5 a.m., well, if you're doing it because you're lazy and you just want to lay there, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because you truly feel that 10 or 15 more minutes of laying there is going to help you physically be better through the day, that's another. So balancing the being tough while at the same time being mindful and practicing meditation, it kind of goes back to the beginning where I said they're not mutually exclusive. You can be tough by meditating. You can be tough by being in control of your thoughts, your mind, not necessarily during the meditation itself, but because you've meditated, now you're able to be more focused on where your mind, where your heart is through the day, and you can kind of direct it. So if you're starting to get angry or you're starting to get stressed, you can come back to that meditation that you did earlier in the morning and be more focused on relaxing, focused on getting your body back under control. And I think there's nothing more warrior-like than that. So I think the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Being a meditator and being a warrior, and then also at the same time having that callous mind. I think they all go hand in hand, if that makes sense.
Yep. 23 years in the military. Is that what you said? Something like that?
Yep. Correct. Yep.
And I think as a civilian, where we see, I'm going to use this word loosely, the marketing behind that, if you're a SEAL or you're in the military, you're a badass. Maybe you are a warrior, right? Those type of words. There's really like, this person is tough as shit, like crazy. And then you come over here, and that's that thing that's been in your mind potentially for a long time, right? That's how you've been groomed, if you will. And then you come over here and you have to be mindful of all this other stuff. Is that a hard transition to get into? I mean, I know that when you started meditating, it took months for you to even really get into it. But like, how did you really transition to start allowing this thing that seems so not impactful the same way that it had been ground into you for so long?
Sure. Yeah, I think that doc, first of all, the fact that he sat me down and was like, here's the science and the benefits behind it, that was huge. To know the science, the fact that you're actually physiologically shrinking the size of the amygdala, which is your fight or flight response part of your brain, and you're thickening the lining of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for cognitive thinking. That helped me to be like, okay, well, it's just like him saying, well, if you work out, your heart is going to get stronger, your muscles are going to get bigger, and you're going to be in better shape, right, in general. Well, that's not something you see right off the bat after hitting the gym one time. You have to know that's your goal, that's where you want to get to, You want to be in better shape. Well, you want to be using mindfulness. You want to be in better mental shape. And that takes time. I mean, that goes back to Dan Harris's book in the 10% Happier. That's not going to happen right away. It's a cumulative effect, right? And I don't know if your listeners or your viewers know, but Dan Harris had like a nervous breakdown on the air. He was an anchorman for, I think, NBC, had a nervous breakdown on the air and started, doing his meditation and mindfulness. And that's what has helped him.
Which you wouldn't, if you've ever watched the video, you actually really can't tell when it's happening, but he feels it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He just like stops basically and says, "Hey, we need a break for a commercial break or something." But you can't really see it. But now knowing, as I've watched it since then, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally see what's happening here for him. But the bottom line is, meditation and mindfulness, it's not going to have an immediate impact. It has to be a practice that you do for a while. I mean, you may feel like after you've meditated for like 5 or 10 minutes, initially, you may be like, oh yeah, I feel pretty good. I feel relaxed. But if you do it for several months, you're really truly going to start to see the impact. Like if you did that 200 days, I'm sure when you took that 6 months off, or however long it was, I think you said 6 months, you could tell a difference in how you were mentally and how you were coping with different things, coping with stresses. So, and that's not going to be an immediate, like day one you stop, it's not going to be an immediate thing. It's like you built up this tolerance. Well, again, sorry to keep coming back to the same analogy, but day one after not going to the gym, you're not suddenly this fat slob, but as you go more and more away without doing any type of physical activity, it basically gets worse and worse. Same with your mind.
So. I remember the first time that because of meditation that I actually made a different action. I just stopped myself, said, hold on, you need to like make this action. And it was like an aha like moment type of thing. It was really cool. So being in the military for so long, and obviously you're transitioning out, like when did the entrepreneurial bug kind of come in? Because I don't think that's something, I'm 35. It sounds like you're a little bit older than me. Like we weren't taught this when we were in school, right?
Right.
The path was be a CEO of a very successful Fortune 500 business, which wasn't go start this thing is a business that's sexy. And so like, when did that bug come into you, into you now that that's what you're getting into?
Yeah. I think I've always had it in the back of my mind, but in all honesty, I was going to go into corporate America, after I got out of the Navy, go after my maybe executive MBA and go work for some business. I owe it to one person, and it's Kristen Wheeler. And I mentioned to her, hey, I've got this idea for an organization, for a company. And she's like, well, why don't you start it up? And I was like, well, because I'm not an entrepreneur. She's like, yes, you are. You have the entrepreneurial mindset. You are an entrepreneur. Do it. And honestly, after that conversation, which I very clearly remember, I was like, okay, well, maybe I am. And I started reading on entrepreneurship and developing your business canvas and everything. I started learning about it all. I was like, oh yeah, this is I love this stuff. So yeah, it is. I owe it to one person. So Kristen.
There you go. Is that how we met, Kristen?
Yeah, okay. At the Perfect Pitch competition in Norfolk at the Percolator.
I saw her a couple weeks ago.
She's doing well for herself. I think she's moving to North Carolina.
North Carolina, there you go.
Yeah.
So you realize by having a meeting with her that the itch is real, or not that you have the itch, but that it is a possibility. Then you go deeper into it, and then throughout all this, you realize that meditation and mindfulness is something that you want to continue on, and then you just start trying to get clients doing it. How did you kind of figure out that side of it?
I haven't figured it out. I'm still working that. Kind of the plan that I have is one, establish who I am, my brand, make sure people know when they Google me, meditation pops up or mindfulness pops up. So I've tried to put out a lot of content on different forms of social media. Then I've been reading a lot of books, like reading yours, which funny enough, I'm in Gather co-working space and somebody has it on their desks back in the back. I saw it just a few minutes ago.
Who has it?
I don't know. It's somebody that has a Virginia Tech pennant up in their office.
Well, I'm very happy for them.
Yeah.
Lucky them.
Yep. So, reading books on it, they have different plans, Entrepreneurial getting out on podcasts and sharing your story, again, further entrenching that brand for who you are. And then now that I've got the kind of brand foundation built, okay, what's next? Getting out, making connections with other entrepreneurs, potentially partnering with them. So right now I'm partnering with John Hawley and John Davis. John Davis is up in Pittsburgh. John Hawley's here locally. He's a master facilitator on design thinking, human-centered design. We've partnered together, and I'm learning from them, and they were learning from me. We swap stories. And I think that's kind of not that we have a formal mastermind group, but I think learning from people who've done it before is how I'm going about things. Learning from you, people like yourself.
Yeah, I think that word mastermind was first coined by Napoleon Hill way back when.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know for sure if it was coined by Napoleon Hill, but yes, I've read the books.
I'm gonna say it was coined by him. You're right. I don't know that it is. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that it was. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea is connect with people who've been there before, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that I think is really key about masterminding or coaching or whatever you want to call it is once you've gone past that person, though, finding that next set of people, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people will stick with that group because they like them, they feel comfortable there, and then they don't get through that next step because they haven't moved on to that new group. And I think that's where a lot of younger entrepreneurs, not necessarily in age of business, not age of person, struggle to get to that next step because they haven't found that next group of people that will that have been there and done that before. So
yeah, right. You're like the average of the 5 people that you hang around with, right? And if you continue to hang around the same 5 people, you're going to have that same average. So yeah.
I think that's interesting that you said, when you Google me, that meditation or mindfulness comes up, because when I did Google you recently, those were the things that popped up. And so some of the things that I hadn't known about, it worked. Hey, some of it doesn't always work, right?
Yeah.
Some of the things that I learned about were like, I saw your Insight Mindful.
Insight Timer.
Yeah, that's what I have, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Insight Timer. Yeah, I had your actual voice meditation come out, and so I listened to that for a few minutes, and so I hadn't heard about that before, which was interesting.
Nice.
And so it seems like you're doing that well. So, and you have an interesting last name. You don't have a common last name, which I think helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a book in you? Is a book on the horizon?
If I was sitting in my office at home, you would see I have a whole bunch of stickies up on the wall behind me. One of them is get on podcasts, which I'm doing. Get on social media quite often. Develop a following on different platforms, and then ultimately it leads to a book. There's a sticky that everything's pointing towards a book, which that's just a next step. But it is right now. That's the plan, is to eventually write a book. Less about time in the SEALs, more about what led me to this. I mean, sure, there's going to be, like I mentioned, it's a part of who I am, but it's not everything. It's not all of who I am.
It's my the business card.
Yeah, it is. It's the business card. Yep. It's the kind of what gets me in the door. But then if I don't have a much more in-depth story to tell, then what do people want to listen to?
Are there other Navy SEALs that are talking about mindfulness and meditation to the extent that you want to be?
There is. Mark Devine. He's out in San Diego. He's got quite the following, and he's written 3 books about, not exclusively about mindfulness, but about mindset. But he's a big proponent and practitioner of mindfulness and meditation, yoga. He's got a company called SEAL Fit that has been very successful. So yeah, he, as a matter of fact, he was my first guest on my podcast that I'm running for Veterans Path, which is the nonprofit that I work for. But yes, there's several. But yeah, Mark Devine is the guy who pops to mind.
What's this tattoo?
That is Hebrew. for I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. It's from the Song of Solomon in the Bible. My wife and I don't know if you can tell here, listeners won't be able to tell, but I'll describe it. I've got a rubber ring. In the teams, a lot of guys don't wear rings because some of the work we do, if a ring gets caught, you can get degloved and actually strip that finger off. So at one point, I was talking about getting this tattooed around my finger as my wedding ring, but it's too detailed. So my wife and I both have this tattooed in Hebrew around our wrists. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine.
Yeah, it's a little too long for your fingers. You don't have you don't have Andre the Giant fingers. So, Veterans Path, what is that? How did you get involved with it?
So Veterans Path, it's PATH for Peace, Acceptance, Transformation, and Honor. It's a nonprofit based out of California, moving to Colorado Springs, and then also to have retreats. We run retreats for veterans, introducing them to meditation and mindfulness. We're looking to have some retreats out here in Virginia as well. How I got involved with them was when I was talking about what I wanted to do in my life after the Navy, in that entrepreneurial kind of mindset. I thought, well, you know what? I also want to give back to veterans. I'm gonna found a nonprofit teaching mindfulness and meditation to vets. And then as I started to do a little bit of customer discovery and find out whether that was worth doing, I found out, yes, it is very much worth doing, but there's already an organization that does it. So through networking, I got introduced to a member of their board of directors, and then they asked me to come on to work for them. But I didn't have time, or I wasn't able to come on and work for them as soon as they wanted me to, not in a full-time paid position. So I'm actually doing an internship through them, or through the SOCOM Care Coalition or Skill Bridge program during the last few months of my military career. So I'm still on the Navy's dime, but Veterans Path is employing me.
So if someone was listening and they want to get involved in Veterans Path, what's the type of person that you guys are looking for to go?
So people who come to our retreats in the past have been those who have struggled with post-traumatic stress. I don't want to call it post-traumatic stress disorder, but they've struggled with some type of traumatic stress, whether that's from the battlefield, whether it's from family issues, whether it's from a car wreck, or whether it's from military sexual trauma. That said, we are doing a fairly significant strategic pivot to where we're going to be offering meditation and mindfulness to all veterans. And when I say the word veteran, I mean that means before you hang up the uniform or not. So you could be active duty, or you could have hung up the uniform. And that's really where we're going to start to focus, is on transition, because that in and of itself is a stressful time. And we want to equip transitioning military members with these same tools to prepare them to deal with that stress, and then ultimately make them more resilient and more employable on the outside.
Gotcha. So Veterans Path, or just you and your business, military spouses, mm-hmm. and mindfulness and meditation and this, and I think we constantly are focused on those that are serving and not those that are married to those who serve. And so what's it like, how does your wife deal with all of this type of stuff? And because I don't think it's often talked about, and I've talked about a little bit about this on the show throughout the years, but it's spouses go through this as well. And I think the stuff that you're talking about is something that they would benefit from as well. And so how do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. I fully agree. And that's actually a perfect segue. We are going to be running a retreat here in Virginia in April for couples. It's going to be a combined Veterans Path and Trails of Purpose retreat. Trails of Purpose is an equine therapy group here locally in the Virginia Beach area. And one of the co-facilitators on the mindfulness side, her name's Jackie Chirac. She is a spouse of a SEAL, and she runs mindfulness and meditation specifically for the spouses in her own organization called, I'm going to screw this up. I always screw it up, so forgive me, Jackie, but I think it's Solidarity of Sisters. But yeah, that's a whole unique challenge. And I think that it's helpful to have a spouse facilitate that type of mindfulness and meditation, because like I said, it is its own unique challenge, dealing with the stresses of having your spouse deployed, the stresses of being at home alone with your children, potentially while your spouse is deployed, dealing with your spouse coming back from deployment and inserting himself back into your routine, and how that, that's a unique stress. So I think that is definitely something that we're going to look to do in the future, is help spouses as well.
What about in schools, military or not, teaching kids the mindful and meditation ways? How early should we be implementing this type of stuff?
How early should we be? That I can't answer. How early I would like it to be is I've got an almost 3-year-old little girl at home, and when she goes on one of her tirades, my wife and I will grab her and sit her down on our legs and be like, "Hey, just take a deep breath." And what we've taught her through a friend of mine, she said, "Hey, teach her to blow out as though she's blowing out candles on a cake." And we'll tell her to do that, and you can see her turn from this beet red color, kind of the blood goes back into her body and leaves her face. Now she's back to normal color, and she calms down instantly. So I really think that, and I've talked to people about this, that's where I personally want to end up teaching this, is to our youth, because I think in this day and age, the stress level of our teenagers with social media, being connected to their phones all the time, seeing how great all their friends' lives are, or at least perceived to be, that causes levels of depression and anxiety and stress with our youth that we didn't grow up with. And I think the earlier we give them these tools, the better they are going to be able to handle that type of stress, not just from social media, but from school as well, the pressure to perform. So the earlier I think that we give our youth these tools, the better. And personally, I would like to, my company, Macaskill Consulting, right now I'm teaching to corporate teams. Long term, I want a nonprofit arm of that is teaching it specifically to schools.
Yeah, we live in this instant gratification, and everyone, the amount of likes that you have on your post, or how successful you are. And I just don't care about those things. And obviously you and I didn't grow up with those things, but the earlier that, our youth can get into these type of things from a mindful and meditation standpoint, I think it's great. And I love what you were talking about with blowing out the candles with your daughter. That sounds good. I think a lot of adults could probably use that too. Honey, just sit there, blow out some candles, sit on my lap, and whatever. So, do you link MacaskillConsulting.com? Is that right?
I don't have my email is Macaskill, is Jon Macaskill at MacaskillConsulting.com, but I don't own that domain. I do not have a website for my company. It's just LinkedIn.
Right. So that's what I was getting at. And so do you find that is enough? Do you think that you need a website? Because it's it's interesting, because I think so many people will say you need to have a website to have a website, but then it's well, if everything can go through this page,
I would like to have a website down the line. Right now, this is a side gig for me, because I am still active duty Navy and I'm working for Veterans Path. So the work that I do for Macaskill Consulting and for the corporate teams is great. I enjoy it, but it's I only have so much time. And I want to spend time with my family. And if I devoted too much time to Macaskill Consulting, then I would get away from things that are important to me. I want it to remain a side gig for quite a while. So I'm not willing to put too much effort into developing a website or paying a developer. I'm keeping it somewhat lean by going just through social media right now.
No, I appreciate that, and I enjoy it, and I think that all the gurus who tell you, myself included, that you have to have a website, they're wrong. I think you're showing it, right? You can send everyone through the right pages and make it work. What's something we haven't talked about today that you want to talk about or normally like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you've given me a lot of platforms to speak about almost everything I wanted to. I do have a podcast for Veterans Path, and the point of that podcast, I mean, it's entitled Veterans Path Podcast. The point of that is to bring on members who have gone through some of our retreats, or bring on high-performing athletes, corporate leaders who practice mindfulness and meditation to really help to break that stigma down. And I would love if your listeners would give it a shot, listen to Veterans Path podcast, give it a review, subscribe, check it out, and then further help to break that stigma down. And then if you have any potential guests that you would recommend, shoot them my way. And my name is Jon Macaskill, Macaskill, and I can be found on LinkedIn or you can Google me.
Or you can Google him and you'll find at least one page of Google worth of information for him. Also link his stuff in the show notes as well. And so if someone was sitting, listening, viewing, whatevering, thinking about for the last few minutes, I think that mindfulness and meditation is something that I want to explore. And you were sitting right in front of them, what would you tell them to do next? Yeah,
sure. First, I would say, look, here's some science and benefits to it. This is why it works, because I think a lot of people this day and age need to know the science behind something. And then I would introduce them to the very simple apps that you can have on your phone. I mean, people think that to get into meditation, you need to be sitting on a mountain in the Himalayas and in a monastery or something, but you don't. You can sit in your house, listen to a guided meditation on several apps that I recommend are Insight Timer, 10% Happier, Calm is another great one. eMindful is excellent, and eMindful has some military specific stuff that's great. So I would recommend start easy, and by easy I mean don't try to jump into a 45-minute meditation. Start with a 2 or 3 minute meditation on an app, and then as you start to get a little bit more into it, as you start to be able to control that monkey mind, or not control it, but realize when your mind is bouncing around, to be able to come back to whatever it is you're focused on, and then be very and this is a part that I've had to get used to saying: be gentle with yourself, and don't beat yourself up when your mind wanders. That's your mind is going to wander. It's like trying to stop your heart from beating. You can't do it. So that's I guess start easy, start short, and then build upon that, just like the gym.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Zack Miller Says. It's been an absolute pleasure, an honor, and an absolute... I don't know why people say that. Look, I just appreciate you listening to this episode. And I have this exclusively free, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you right now. It's simple. All you have to do is go to zackmillersays.com/newsletter to get my once a week email directly to your email client, whatever you use, like Gmail, Yahoo, AOL. Yeah, you could probably still use that, but it's a once a week, easy to dissect and execute tips, tricks, things I'm thinking about, some content that I've been working on, some entertainment, and sometimes even The Rock makes an appearance. I'd love for you guys to check it out. It's super free. All you have to do is go to mynamesays.com/newsletter. That's Zack, Z-A-C-K. Please don't spell it Zach. zackmillersays.com/newsletter, and you'll get that access every Monday morning, 10:15-ish Eastern Standard Time. It will take up like 90 seconds of your day, and it might actually even help you. We'll just keep it at that. It might just help you, because if I said something else, then I'd have to actually deliver on that. It might help you. zackmillersays.com/newsletter is the go-to one-stop shop to your weekly email newsletter needs. Check it out at zackmillersays.com/newsletter. Peace and pancakes. Bye-bye now.